This program is a community education production brought to you by the Bar Association of Montgomery County and the Montgomery County, Maryland Bar Foundation. The program is designed to provide you with general information regarding your rights and obligations under the law. It is not intended as specific legal advice. You should discuss the facts and circumstances of any particular matter with your own attorney and obtain advice specific to your case. The participants are local attorneys who have volunteered their time to bring you this program. We hope you find it informative and beneficial.
Welcome to Law School for the Public. My name is Mark Gilday, and I'm a partner in the law firm of Bregman, Burbridge, Schwartz & Gilday, located in Bethesda, Maryland. Our show today is called The Law of Marijuana in Maryland. Across the United States, marijuana laws are rapidly changing, and these changes have led to a lot of confusion. For many of us, that confusion also exists here in Maryland. So, in today's show, we're going to discuss the law of marijuana in Maryland. We're going to discuss medical marijuana to include what is it, who qualifies for it, how is it sold, and where is it sold. Next, we're going to discuss the decriminalization of marijuana in Maryland. Specifically, what does decriminalization mean? Finally, we are going to discuss the law regarding expungement of past marijuana possession offenses to include what does expungement mean, who qualifies for it, and what is the expungement process. To answer these and other questions, we are fortunate to have with us two guests who are highly qualified to discuss the law of marijuana in Maryland. First, we have Mike Rothman. Mike is an experienced criminal defense attorney who practices in Maryland and the District of Columbia. He is also the founder and principal of the Medical Cannabis Law Group located in Rockville, Maryland. For more than 10 years, Mike has also advised clients around the country about marijuana, its medical uses, and its legality in commercial transactions. He is a member of the National Cannabis Industry Association. He is also a lifetime member of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, better known as NORML. Our next guest is Olivia Naugle. Olivia is the legislative coordinator for the Marijuana Policy Project, known as MPP, located in Washington, D.C. MPP is the largest organization in the United States that is focused solely on marijuana policy reform. MPP has been responsible for changing most of the state marijuana laws that have been reformed since the year 2000. As MPP's legislative coordinator, Olivia leads MPP's lobbying efforts regarding marijuana here in Maryland. She also takes a lead in organizing the Maryland Cannabis Policy Coalition, a group of organizations with the shared mission of ending marijuana prohibition here in Maryland. Mike, Olivia, thank you for joining us today. And I'd like to begin with a general question regarding medical marijuana. And I'd like to ask that of you, Olivia, and then come back to you, Mike, for some of the specifics. So, Olivia, if you could give us a general overview of the medical marijuana laws here in Maryland.
Sure. So former Governor O'Malley signed an effective medical marijuana law in 2014 here in Maryland. And what that means is that Maryland patients with certain medical conditions now have legal access to medical cannabis to treat that condition. Currently, the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission is charged with overseeing the state's medical marijuana program.
And when I use the word medical marijuana and you use the word medical cannabis, are we talking about the same thing, Mike?
We are talking about the same thing. Recently, the Medical Cannabis Commission the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission had requested a name change from marijuana to the Cannabis Commission because, mainly in part, that we're talking about the plant, cannabis sativa, as well as also the longstanding history of the word marijuana. While it's a defined term under the Maryland Code and under the Maryland Criminal Code, it actually is and does have a fairly racist past. So we prefer to use the name of the plant as a general way of getting past the old stereotypes and maybe misconceptions that have been taking place.
When we refer to medical marijuana, as a threshold matter, medical marijuana is legal in Maryland. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right.
We are one of 33 states, I believe, who have a medical program.
Who qualifies for the medical program in Maryland?
So in Maryland, you have to have either a debilitating medical condition or one that has chronic pain. And once you meet those two conditions, a physician, a treating physician, can then recommend that you become a medical patient, a Maryland medical cannabis patient in Maryland.
Are the conditions under which you would qualify for medical marijuana defined somewhere? Are they in the statute? Are they in the law?
There are some examples in the law of what meets the chronic pain or debilitating medical condition. Something like a wasting disease that comes with HIV/AIDS, like cachexia, all the way to spasticity for multiple sclerosis, or even anxiety, severe anxiety that can really be debilitating and chronic. And so really there is no definition. It's one of the more liberal laws in the country for medical usage. And really it's up and between the patient and the medical provider to determine whether medical cannabis is right for you.
So anecdotally, we hear about people using marijuana while they're receiving chemotherapy for cancer treatment. Is that something that would fall under the definition of that you've identified for us, that marijuana could be recommended for that?
Yeah, I would definitely say so because, you know, a lot of the studies now have talked about alleviating pain, and there's pain associated with chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. There's also discomfort. Mm-hmm. There's also
severe nausea,
inability to sleep, all of which can turn into chronic conditions or cause debilitating pain, all of which medical cannabis can be useful for.
All right, so assume the example where someone has one of these conditions or the chronic pain. What do they do? Who do they go to for the recommendation?
I'll take that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think it's actually important for people to realize that this isn't one of these go to a doctor and sign up and you get it automatically. There is a process that you have to go through in order to be qualified as a qualifying patient. The first thing you do, if you're even thinking about it, is to go onto the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission's website, go onto the New Patients tab, and sign up for a card. Whether you meet the conditions or not, the first thing you do have to do is register with the commission, and only then can you go and talk to a qualified physician. So you have to be registered first, then you get your recommendation.
All right, well, let me stop you there. So let's follow this example. Somebody, we'll call that person Joe, believes they have a condition that qualifies. What you're telling us is that that person should go onto the Maryland Medical Cannabis website and scroll through and find the place where you actually register.
Correct.
So Joe would pull up a registration form and fill out basic information?
And provide a picture of themselves, which seems to be the sticking point for most of the registration. But once you find a suitable picture and register, then the commission will send you back a registration number.
And is that
then you go to the doctor.
The registration number, is that synonymous with the registration card that you?
No, because you have to then go to the doctor, who will then determine whether you meet the qualifying conditions and whether you have a bona fide relationship, and then you can become a patient. And you'll get a card fairly quickly.
And the healthcare providers are also registered with the commission as well.
All right, let's come back to the that. So I'm following this through. Joe believes he has a condition. He goes on the website. He fills out the form, and is a registration number emailed to him as part of that process?
Yes.
All right. He then takes that number and he goes to a qualified provider, healthcare provider? Is that what happens next?
Qualified treating, it can be a physician. It can also be it can be a
dentist.
chiropractor, a dentist,
A nurse
Nurse
practitioner?
a nurse
yes.
practitioner, and a podiatrist.
Correct.
And so those are qualifying providers, and you have to then go to a qualifying provider.
Are the types of providers who are qualified found on the website?
The types or
So
the
in other
names.
words, not the names, but a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a podiatrist, a dentist. If Joe is on the website and he now gets his registration number, can he find somewhere on there that I have to go to this type of provider? Podiatrist, dentist, doctor,
You don't have to go to any particular provider, but in order
the
to
categories. Are the categories listed in there?
I don't recall if it's broken out by category, but I
Okay.
do know that in order to be a qualifying provider, a physician, an RN, or whatever, you have to be registered with the commission. Not any doctor or RN can recommend. So you can go on and see who's
Okay. So
Registered.
the providers also have to go through a registration process.
correct.
Do they have to do anything more than simply go online and register to be a registered provider? Don't know.
No, there may be some specialized
Fee?
courses, but as far as I am aware, there's no minimum training or certification that they have to go through by virtue of being a
So now
healthcare
we
provider.
have, Joe has gone on, he's gotten his registration number, he's found a list of providers, he takes his registration number and he goes to a provider,
correct.
and what happens next?
They go through. They would go through what would be this fairly routine set of questions to determine if you have a chronic condition or debilitating condition or chronic pain, and if it does meet the criteria, and the physician thinks that it could be beneficial for you, then he or she would register you as a patient, and then you would get notified at the physician or the qualifying provider's place. You'd know immediately.
So when you're at the provider's office and the provider deems you a candidate for the medical cannabis, the provider goes ahead and enters that information
Into the registry.
into the register right there and then?
Yes.
And then there's the feedback from the state
The
that
state
says,
sends you a card, or on April 1st, the commission said that you had to have a card. I think they recently rescinded that, where you no
probably
longer
'cause it
have
was
to have a
April
card.
1st.
Probably. So you're supposed to have a card, or a card makes it easy because, for example, if somebody asks if you are a medical cannabis patient, because there are certain places or details that require that knowledge.
So now Joe has his card. What does he do with it? Where does he go to get his medical cannabis?
You want to take that?
Sure. So the commission license is in charge of licensing cultivators, processors, and dispensaries. So the patient would then be able to access their medical cannabis through a number of dispensaries throughout the state of Maryland. And you can also go on the commission's website and find a dispensary near you.
And just to add on to that, there is 2 dispensaries per senatorial district. So there's 102, will be 102 when fully built out in the state, up to 115 dispensaries spread evenly throughout the state, 2 per senatorial district.
Okay. So he takes his card, he goes into the dispensary with a prescription from his provider, or what? What does he get from the provider? Is it a prescription?
If I can correct you there.
Please.
So physicians and other qualifying providers are only allowed to prescribe drugs that are capable of being prescribed. Schedule 1, which is what cannabis or marijuana is listed as in the Control of Dangerous Substances Act. That means that under the federal definition, cannabis has no accepted medical uses and is highly highly addictive and incapable of being used. So clearly Maryland has a contradiction with the federal law and whether it should be in a Schedule 1. But really a Schedule 1 is incapable of being prescribed. Schedule 1s are like heroin, PCP, LSD, all are incapable of being recommended, even by a doctor. So it'd be a recommendation.
So therefore, the provider, whomever it is, makes a recommendation, provides Joe with that recommendation, he takes it to the dispensary, and then he selects together with somebody that works there what is appropriate for his malady, his ailment. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a good description of it. There's
Go
a
ahead.
term of art called a bud tender. And these are essentially the people that work at the dispensaries who are now trained, and there's a physician or a qualifying physician usually attached to a dispensary who's supposed to be educating the bud tenders about the different maladies, which of the various strains might be great for your particular malady.
And the marijuana or cannabis that Joe will take out of the dispensary with him, in what form is it? Olivia?
There's a variety of forms that you can have with medical cannabis here in Maryland. So that includes flower, that includes things like topical ointments, pills. I might be missing a couple, but there's a variety of different.
Waxes, shatters, concentrates.
Could he leave with something that he would smoke?
Well, funny, the term smoke is...
Well, let me stop, because when we out there who are not familiar with this, we think about marijuana, we think about smoking it. So if Joe goes to the dispensary, can he come out with something that he puts in a pipe or something and smokes it?
Not only can he come away with something that he puts into a pipe and smoke it, he could take a tincture and put a single drop under his tongue and get the effect sublingual. There are patches, transdermal patches that go on against your skin that deliver a lot of the CBDs or mixtures that you're hoping to get. And so there's many different ways. And under the new medical cannabis law, in fact, smoking, a method of ingestion called vaporizing, which basically heats up the either oil or the product to a point at which the active ingredients turn to vapor, is no longer considered smoking. So it's an interesting question.
So with this medical marijuana, if I understand it correctly, medical marijuana is legal in Maryland. There are a number of steps that the user, the patient, would have to go through in order to get it, but if he or she goes through those steps, she can be provided with some marijuana for the pain or ailment, correct?
Very quickly. And also caregivers. I think you leave out a very big category. Maryland has a caregiver law where if you're incapable of caring for yourself, you can designate somebody else as your caregiver, people that are in hospice, people that are in terminal illnesses.
Well, we could probably spend an hour more on just the medical marijuana, but I next want to touch on the decriminalization of marijuana here in Maryland. As a threshold Maryland issue, the recreational use of marijuana is not legal in Maryland. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So when we
Could I actually
you may
ask you...
to define my terms?
Well, recreational is a term that sort of gets under my skin because we call it adult use now because you don't have recreational alcohol. You know, it seems to me that there is a really disservice being done to the medicine itself when you call it recreational because people use it for different terms. So I guess we in the industry prefer it as adult use.
All right, so with regard to adult use of marijuana is not legal in Maryland. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, up to a certain amount.
No, I'm not talking about decriminalization.
Okay.
I'm talking about the distinction, and that's a distinction I think we should make for purposes of this discussion here today. There is some use of marijuana has been decriminalized in Maryland. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what is that threshold?
Yeah, so Maryland decriminalized up to 10 grams of marijuana in 2014.
What does that mean?
What that means is that if, under current law in Maryland, if you are caught in possession of 10 grams or less of marijuana, you will be issued a civil citation, similar to a traffic ticket. So you'll be imposed to a $100 fine for your first offense. Second offense, you will be issued the same citation. The fine will just be $250. And then for the third offense, the fine increases to $500, and you also be required to go through some sort of drug education. So anything above 10 grams is still illegal, but when we're talking about decriminalization, we're talking about removing the criminal penalties. So that person with less than 10 grams will not be subject to arrest, they won't have jail time, and they won't have a criminal conviction.
And so when someone is arrested with less than 10 grams of marijuana, and you said it's a civil citation like a speeding ticket,
Right.
pays the fine, and when they go to fill out an application for employment and it says, have you ever been convicted of a crime, the answer is no with respect to that issue, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
The answer is
All
no.
right. And the decriminalization is at a threshold level of 10 grams.
Yes, and that's actually the lowest threshold of all the states that have decriminalized marijuana.
And I'm sure you're working on that in Annapolis. But over 10 grams is still illegal,
Correct.
correct?
Still a crime.
All right. And that is the distinction between decriminalization, which is a civil offense, you pay a fine like a speeding ticket, and criminalization, which is over 10 grams, which is still in the whole criminal milieu, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
All
when
right.
we're talking about decriminalization as it relates to marijuana, what we're talking about is making marijuana possession a civil offense rather than a criminal offense.
All right, so we've talked about medical marijuana that is legal, the decriminalization of less than 10 grams of marijuana. And thirdly, let's talk about expungement of past marijuana offenses, because I think that's important for people to understand. If they were arrested and convicted of possession of marijuana so many years ago, that there's now a process that they could get that expunged. So Mike, let me ask you, what does expungement mean? And we've got about 3 minutes.
So expungement is the permanent removal from public viewing of a criminal record, and that's done through and purged through the record system of the criminal justice system.
With respect to marijuana, what is the law of expungement in Maryland today?
So recently Maryland has changed the law to say that anything that has formerly been a crime and for which somebody was convicted and is now no longer a crime.
And let me stop you there. So that is less than 10 grams.
10 grams or
All right,
less.
so 8 years ago, someone was arrested with 8 grams of marijuana and he got a criminal conviction.
Yes.
It's on the books. What does he do?
He should or she should go to a clerk's office to try to confirm that conviction. There needs to be some evidence that it was less than 10 grams.
And when you say clerk's office, you mean clerk's office in a courthouse?
In a courthouse, in a district court, most likely,
Okay.
in
All right.
Maryland.
So if they want to do it by themselves, that's a process. They can always call Mike Rothman in Rockville.
Always.
But if they don't call Mike, they go to the clerk's office in the likely district court in the.
Or you could also exercise some self-help and just go to the Maryland Case Judiciary search, look up your name, see what's on the books, and then write down those numbers and bring them to the clerk's office so that you can direct them to your particular citations.
And this process it involves some paperwork
It would.
and demonstrating to the clerk's office that it was less than 10 grams.
You would fill out the proper paperwork, but there would be no fee attached.
Okay. You fill it out, and then you have to follow up to make sure, in fact, it gets expunged.
Well, they actually check on your paperwork before you leave the courthouse, and you'll walk away with a carbon sheet.
All right, so now it has been, is there a number of years that has to?
It takes supposedly 90 days,
No, but
really,
if-
in practice.
If someone was arrested 5 years ago, qualify for expungement if it's less than 10 grams?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, because right now, it's no longer a crime.
got it. So you go through the expungement process, and then this person goes to fill out a job application that says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? The record has now been expunged. How does the person answer that question?
That's an interesting question. It depends who's asking.
All right,
And
you're asking on the state level.
on the state level, you could say yes, because the expungement statute is a state creation. It's a state law.
And by that you mean on the state level, you can say, I have never been convicted of a crime.
Correct,
And
because
this is all with the caveat that while we have certain laws in the state of Maryland regarding marijuana, medical marijuana, the decriminalization and expungement, none of that applies on the federal level, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
So
Yes, it
if
is.
someone is up at Antietam in a federal park, that's a whole different situation,
That
correct?
is
Yes.
correct.
All right.
Because, yes, as you had said, we have a whole different system of federalism.
And is it fair to say that with the efforts of MPP and NORML and other organizations, these laws, which we discussed are rapidly changing, are continuing to change at a rapid pace?
It's a great social experiment, and you are actually watching a mixture of a number of different factors, including federalism, changing tastes, and changing acceptabilities of people, and they're coming together in the form of government.
All right, well, this is, we have said that there is a lot to talk about, and there's much more that we would like to know and learn about the law of marijuana in Maryland, but we've run out of time in today's program. I would like to thank our guests, Mike Rothman, Olivia Noggle, for being with us here today. Please let us know what you think of the show, as well as what topics you would like to see on future programs by emailing us at lawschoolforthepublic@gmail.com. You can find this show and past shows online by searching Law School for the Public Montgomery and following the link. Also, this program airs every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. on Channel 21. Please join us for our future shows in the Law School for the Public series. On behalf of the Bar Foundation of Montgomery County, I am your host, Mark Gilday. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.